Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am joined today by Alison Grieve of G-Hold fame. Alison, give us a wave, say hello.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us today. Alison and I were just having a quick chat off camera before we hit record, and we're actually going to take this in two parts the next wee while that we're going to speak. So we're going to start with a customer interview asking some kind of quick fire rapid questions, and then Alison's going to have the chance to explain a little bit about her journey as a founder. So Alison, I don't know if you just want to say hello and introduce yourself.
Hi, so I'm Alison Grieve. I am founder of G-Hold, which is a manufacturing and IP business.
That is great, thank you. Okay, so you have kind of made a start. We're going to dive into the customer interview section. And I wanted to ask you, in terms of G-Hold, how do you guys define yourselves as what sector are you and what type of business are you?
So there's kind of two strands to our strategy. We manufacture and sell ergonomic hand tools. This is one for larger devices than phones currently. So for any kind of tablet or large handheld device. We also have a patent portfolio. So we have two different products within our patent portfolio. So one is a food service tray, safe tray that doesn't topple over, which we licensed to a North American partner a few years ago. And of course the G-Hold, which has a patent family around any kind of mobile computing device, which can also be a phone.
Okay, and so how large are your team right now? What size is your team?
Our core team is really small. We've got less than 5 people working in management at any given time. But we also have a larger freelance base. We manufacture the G-Holds in Scotland, and we have an in-house assembly team who comprise of kind of gig economy freelancers. So, life models, artists, games makers, some startup entrepreneurs themselves who just want to make a bit of extra cash, but not with any commitment of, that sometimes they'll be free for a few months and then sometimes they won't be free at all. So that's how we manage the assembly process.
So with that team, and it sounds like there's a lot of flexibility, but then also, I guess, movement and change within that. What kind of SaaS products do you use across the team that you pay for to support that kind of productivity?
Yeah, so for our full-time actually employed management team, we use Microsoft Teams in order to just manage the day-to-day operations. We use MRP Easy, or Mr. Peasy as it's sometimes called, which is great for manufacturers to be able to manage stock as it moves through an assembly process. So it's not just a question of retail stock management systems whereby you'll have here however many completed products. You're able to raise the value of that stock for your balance sheet as it moves through the system. We also use Xero for our accountancy, which we find extremely useful. We are about to start with Float, a wonderful local SaaS business, of which we're big fans. So we're looking forward to really starting to input our details through there. And for a little bit of spying for our sales pipeline, we use Lead Forensics, which is a very useful system for seeing who has been viewing your website, if they're businesses, and we sell a lot, B2B, so that's useful for us as well as geographically.
Right, and building on that marketing element, are there any CRM tools or mailing list tools that you pay for, or is it free subscriptions you're using?
Well, yes, Lead Forensics is actually, it does have a CRM function to it. Over the years, I've used so many CRMs. I used to manage Salesforce's previously, funnily enough, for SaaS business. So, but yeah, so I mean, I've played about with a number of them, but I think because we're fairly targeted in terms of who our direct customers are. We try to keep things simple, so we work through distribution. But in support of that, we need to be doing that end user pool marketing as well. and then we can feed that through our distribution channels. So for example, we have an education distributor in the US who we feed US education leads to. So whenever a US educator looks on our site, then we'll send that lead over to our distribution partner. So it works pretty well in support of our channels.
So what about personal use SaaS products that you pay for? So whether that's maybe DocSend, or if you use meeting management software like Zoom, are there any of those SaaS products that you pay for just for your own use rather than team-wide?
Yeah, so I do a lot of, I've started to get into augmented reality. I mean, in support of Ghold, you know, Ghold gets involved with that a little bit as well, but certainly it's also a personal passion of mine. So I've started to buy into, for example, Artivise, which is really focused on artists who are bringing their artwork to life. And also a lot of I do a bit of an app smash for that product. So I don't know what I would, it's been such a joy to learn a lot of the available augmented reality software providers over the past year, and to think of what we can use that for in education and logo design and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love hearing that. So to date, how would you describe your journey in terms of investment and funding, taking grants aside for the moment? Just what kind of investment journey have you been on?
Yeah, so when we had, I launched with Safe Tray, which is a tray that doesn't topple over for the food service industry. And that we went through quite a traditional funding round for. I should possibly mention that to get Safe Tray started, I hadn't started from an engineering place. As much as I'd always been interested in invention and in design, I didn't come from that background in terms of academic study. So when I first started, I gave a proportion of the company to product design consultancy in order to have the CAD file, you know, my paper-based designs that you couldn't really take to a manufacturer. I had the product design consultancy kind of make them come to life. So that it meant that some of the upfront costs that are usually associated with product companies was taken out a little bit in exchange for equity. And then we went through a funding round. I mean, going back, we started in 2010. So our first funding round was 2011. And we took £200,000 for the company at that point through a mixture of equity gap, private investors, and a little bit of Scottish co-investment funds money then. And so
how does that evolve? What does that look like to date?
Well, I mean, really, it's quite funny because initially that was to fund the manufacturing and distribution through traditional distribution routes for the Safe Tray, which we did. We commercialized across over 20 countries worldwide, working with 30 distributors. But we did have some issues with manufacturing. And then we identified a potential licensee for our patents. So we sold a license in a $500,000 deal over to the US. So that licensing money really funded the initial growth of Ghold. When I came up with the idea for that, we did a Kickstarter, another little kind of sideways move to funding. So because it was a product, again, we could do rewards funding. And from there, we kind of drip fed, to be honest, Ghold. It didn't have big whacks of investment until last year, where we took just over 200,000 again to really to enable us to scale Ghold, because we were finding that we were getting more orders than we were able to actually fulfill towards the end of 2017. So we really invested into optimization of our manufacturing in Scotland, and that's really made a big difference in raising the underlying value of Ghold, and also investment into the patents again to make sure that they were strong as nails in an ever-growing category of holders.
So I can definitely hear that the revenue has been a large part of that journey, and we'll definitely get into that. How much have you raised to date, if you would include first doing the tray and then doing Ghold? Like, what's that journey been?
We've raised, I think, almost bang on 600,000.
And how many shareholders make that up for you guys?
Pardon?
How many shareholders does that look like for you guys?
Over 30. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So I would love to get into just quickly touch on the process of how you keep those guys up to date. So what does that look like? How do you speak to your shareholders, your investors?
Yeah, so we used to do quarterly newsletters. It's been a little bit more sporadic recently. We try and tap into some of equity gaps, the system they use is Fathom, which feed from zero, and we're about to add more to the KPIs that Fathom tracks, so things like Google Analytics and all of that kind of additional information. So that's one way that it's been tracked, but I feel that now we've just got a new team and we're becoming much better at reporting internally and much better at reporting in the board meetings. And so we have monthly board meetings, so they're really quite structured. We had quite an entirely different board for the first maybe 5 years of the company, and then for the past 4 years of the company we have been working together all that time. Rob Dobson has joined as a joined our board not as a director, but because he took investment last year, and that's been a real pleasure as well to have joined the board. So the board meetings, we're quite comfortable. I'm really happy with how they're run now. I think that previously I was quite green. When you first I hadn't really, as much as I'd had a business before this business, I had not had a board, and certainly not consisting of people who were 30 years older than me and who were, so I think I wasn't quite sure how to operate a board, how to manage a board, and crucially I had to get the most value out of a board. So now I feel a lot more comfortable with how that's run.
Yes.
And so board meetings are always a pleasure and always challenging in the right way, and I get a lot more value out of them now.
So when you did do a kind of newsletter and you were updating, what worked for you about that process, and what tools did you use?
So literally just like a Word doc that went out, once a quarter. It was actually our previous chairman who sent them out, and he's a fantastic writer, and very well respected in the community. So that worked really well, and I think it's something that we should look at reintroducing. But yeah, we're also interested to see how Fathom works out, because we haven't really tapped into it enough, and we've just brought on board someone from PwC, Ian Marshall, who is going to help us to report on the financial figures on a monthly basis, and he's quite interested in playing about with Fathom, getting rid of the stuff that really doesn't mean anything on a month-by-month basis, but really, really fine-tuning the stuff that does. One of the things that we've done, without getting into too much boring detail, is recognize that for a company like ours that invests heavily in our assets, both our intellect, our intangible assets being patents, and also our physical assets, we have not been very good at recognizing that on the balance sheet. We've been very cash focused, which is fine, but then it doesn't tell the underlying value of a company if you're only ever focused on cash and the P&L, and not really recognizing how valuable some of these assets are. So that's something that we want to start reporting on a lot more and recognizing more, and just stopping behavior which is doing ourselves down in our financial reporting.
I'm definitely hearing you talk about how internal reporting and those structures absolutely are the basis for what can I then report to, whether that's shareholders or board members or investors. It sounds like they're very linked. So I think that's really helpful now for the customer interview. And I would love just to dive into, tell me a little bit more about like how you came to be the founder of what you've created. And if we can dig into your kind of the revenue side of it, because that's a large part of how you've made progress today. I'd love to hear more.
Sure. So it starts with Safe Tray. Safe Tray, as I say, it's a food service tray that doesn't topple over. I'd wanted to get into products for quite a while. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I did come from a SaaS background of selling software as a service for a large organization, LexisNexis in London. And but I really liked the idea of having set up an events business where good ideas could just be stolen by another events company. I realized that with physical product, the fact that you can patent good ideas and you can retain the rights to those patents, and also that you can see those good ideas being manufactured, especially in a country like Scotland that is such a powerhouse for manufacturing, it just really excited me. So I set about making the Safe Tray and having it produced. And always, I mean, we went to a trade show in America very early on. I mean, 13 months after the company formed, and made sure that we got pre-sales in even before the manufacturing was established. And I think that focus on both export from day one and selling, going to trade shows, meeting customers, making decisions based on the market rather than what I thought in my head might be the best way forward was what really made the difference. Because a mistake in when you're spending £30,000 on tools is a massive mistake. It's not something that a glitch that you can fix in code. It's kind of like you're cutting into steel, literally. And so it's really important that before you launch a product company, you definitely know that there's a market for it, and you have customers at the ready. I think the other thing was with G-Hold, I had learned quite a lot about the process by then, and the credibility of having some of the deeper science behind holding, rather than just a Me Too product, like, oh, it's the case that you put on something, or it's we really investigated the hand and the wrist and the carpal tunnel. We'd understood hands, and I can't even imagine how many thousands of hands I've studied in close detail. But that's been really important. And another crucial thing about commercializing G-Hold has been in recognizing, whilst we could just straight go through distribution and so on, before we even launched, we went to companies like Belkin and Logitech and Apple and Best Buy, so the biggest players in the US market, met with their heads of development and asked what their opinion was around, because we've always seen what some people would consider competitors, we would consider potential partners. And addressing that opportunity from day one has meant that we have managed to get on the Design for Microsoft Surface program. We formed relationships with Amazon Devices, we're on their program. So we've kind of gone for that credibility rather than the lower cost accessory till side type of product. And so investing into that value, now that a massive category has been produced within the holding space, we're in a really powerful position with really strong patents and really strong relationships that has made a big difference.
Can you tell me more about that mindset, whether that was something that evolved or you always had it from the beginning in terms of competitors or potential partners?
Yeah, I think that when you have an underlying IP strategy, which is not a very common strategy for product companies in Scotland and just globally, you kind of feel that you're at a point where hardware, it's so 80s, and everything's already been developed. There's no real inventions. It's just about tweaks to design or whatever. But if you really invest heavily in patents and also in the simplification of design, which can feel counterintuitive, because if you try and simplify design, then you're considered less and less and less and less tech. But actually, there's so much hard work and thought process that goes into simplifying a design and simplifying it again until it's the simplest design that you can put, and it makes patents much stronger. So that aspect of seeing people as opportunities and partners rather than competitors comes from that belief that you can just add a simple value to what exists already in the market. We focus on what we know, which is holding things.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And how do you see, you talked there about, whether something is tech or not, how are those labels useful to you? And has your ego ever either got in the way or challenged you in terms of, does it matter how other people see the business?
Yeah, I mean, for example, we are not one of the sexy categories for investment in Scotland. We learned that a long time ago. When we were only safe tray, then it was kind of acceptable. Oh, a former waitress who did well, and who went and did her little product, and we got to go to the food and drink shows and so on and serve up stuff. That was kind of okay. But the moment that a woman decides to really invest heavily in patents and manufacturing and then hit head on the technology industry, that is not quite so good. That's not something that is massively invested in. But it's not just about being a woman. I see lots of fantastic hardware and materials companies in Scotland who are just being kind of overlooked because we're not in the kind of key driving category. And I can kind of understand that, actually. For a small country like Scotland, it's really important to build an ecosystem around a particular category that's going to attract investors, make it worthwhile for them to get on a plane and know what they're going to meet when they come up to Scotland. So I completely understand that. And the fact that we are an outlier is perhaps not a bad thing, because our market is the US, and that's where we spend a lot of our time. Over 80% of our revenue comes from the US, and we're seeing increasingly that technology businesses in the US are recognizing the interplay between hardware and software. So like PlayStation, their R&D departments are very much between the hardware and the software. Us as a hardware business are getting increasingly into augmented reality. There's a lot more kind of exchange between those two very different business models. Once upon a time, I see them really pulling together now.
And where do you think the future lies for you? Where are the opportunities in the short term?
So again, stateside, so long as the tariffs don't become completely insane in a couple of weeks, we are a little bit nervous, but we have taken the kind of measures that you would expect for a company like ours. So we are being set up with a US entity. We've already become VAT registered across European countries, where you just have to do what you can. It's not like we're ever going to be maybe don't quote me on this, but I can't imagine we're ever going to be like banned from international trade as a country. But once we have some security around that, I think we'll be quite happy. But in terms of the future, for me personally, I have launched 2 product portfolios under this company. There's a third one on that should be launched this year, and so I'll feel like that's a good solid base of contribution. And
I love that that's your baseline. Like the baseline would be that there are 3 portfolios. And then
there are some interesting partnerships potentially in the making as well this year, and of course growth of our existing partnerships. And then I would quite like to, I've started to take an interest in some other companies within the kind of product space of Scotland, just on a pro bono basis, like Robotical, a fantastic company with everything that they're doing in getting children into STEM and into robotics, and also a great materials company called Alter Waste. So I think that personally I get a lot out of, you know, just taking an interest in other boards and helping where I can, because I think that there's so much collaboration that can really happen between Scottish companies. I see it happening in SaaS. I would like to see even more happening within the product companies of Scotland, and between the two as well. I think we're all one big happy family. So
I'm glad we're doing this call.
So yeah, that's what I would like to do personally. See more women on boards. That's something that I would like to contribute to also.
Right, and I guess just taking that as our kind of final point of discussion, what would you say to others, especially potential women founders, so pre-founder, thinking about something, either have an idea or looking to partner up with somebody who does? What do you say to those people who don't necessarily see a lot of other female founders?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you know, if you're getting, we can't ignore the fact that the Rose report was written last week, and it was pretty shocking in terms of the funding that goes to female founders. And whilst that is completely unacceptable and not fair, perhaps to look to customers as a way of funding your business, as I have done, because there's so much gratification that comes from that. You know, Microsoft is a fantastically diverse organization. I've never felt that I was treated differently as a woman to how I would be as a man. The same with our home shopping customers, same with Amazon, same with any of our Apple. You know, you're always treated with respect with these large organizations. And so I think that when you focus on your customers, that can be hugely gratifying, and it can be a wonderful antidote to other things that are more frustrating in the route to being a founder. I think that women will find that they're much more respected when they're with people who understand their product, respect them for the industry in which they're operating within, because who sets up a business that they know nothing about is very unusual. So if you just try and see your peer group as being the people you meet at trade shows and those kinds of networks that start forming, especially internationally, then I think that women will get a lot of kind of, every time you reach a low ebb, if you just try and remind yourself of your customers and those relationships, then it really, really helps to motivate you and spur you on.
Thank you so much for sharing so much of your journey with us today, and I'm definitely excited for your third release. When can people be looking out for that and staying in touch with you on that?
Well, I mean, if I was being really optimistic, July, but it might ebb more to August, just product being product.
Completely fair. That's great. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was fab, and thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you. All the best. Bye.
Eve.
Good. Thank you so much.